Thanks everybody for being here today. We're really excited for this workshop. If you are joining us from the Remake community and this is your first meetup group, we have policy and advocacy meetup groups every single month. And Allison can drop some information in the chat for you about how to continue the conversation in Slack after today's training. We'd be happy to continue chatting with you about these subjects over there. But today we've got a couple of wonderful guest presenters who are joining us. And so I'm going to turn it over to Theresa and Sarah to introduce themselves and take it away.
Sarah, do you want to go first?
Sure, we're both waiting for the other to go. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Sarah Newell. I'm the Director of Transnational Strategies at the Worker-Driven Social Responsibility Network. And I'm also an alum of United Students Against Sweatshops, who's done a lot of different protests on university campuses and at stores. And I'm really excited to talk about how to design an excellent protest today. Oh, and I'm based in Los Angeles.
Well, thanks, Sarah. And I'm Theresa Haas. I'm the Director of Global Strategies at the labor union Workers United, which represents garment and textile workers in the US and Canada. And I'm also an alum of United Students Against Sweatshops and have engaged in direct actions on university campuses, in malls, in stores, and outside of government buildings. So really excited to get a chance to talk with everybody today about direct action and escalation. And I think, Sarah, we have a PowerPoint presentation we wanted to show. Is that something you would mind putting up on the screen? Okay, cool. Awesome, thanks. Great. And just a couple of housekeeping things while we get that started. So my understanding from Emily is that we have an hour for this presentation. And so the way that we will do it is Sarah and I will run through the PowerPoint and the couple of different topics that we wanted to cover. And then at about the half an hour mark, we'll transition to talking about a couple of different scenarios that folks might encounter that in a direct action scenario and how to handle those. And then we'll have time for Q&A and discussion at the end. But with that being said, I think, Sarah and I are both very comfortable for people to raise their hands or put questions in the chat while we're going through this. So please feel free to do that, and we'll do our best to keep an eye on the chat, but with the PowerPoint slide up, it's hard to always do that. So Emily, if you see people with questions, please go off mute and just let us know, and we can take those kind of as they come up. We really want this to be a conversation, not talking at people. And so with that being said, Sarah, can we go to the next slide? Thanks. So the 4 topics that Sarah and I will be covering in the first half of the hour are talking about why we engage in direct action, talking about escalation planning, what that means and how you do it. And then Sarah will talk about action design, both how to design actions and also what the different roles and responsibilities are within an action. And then finally, we'll conclude with a little bit of a training about how to knowing your rights, especially when it comes to dealing with police and security, with a very clear disclaimer that I'm not a lawyer and this is not a legal training, but we can give you resources for people who are lawyers and do have legal trainings. So with that being said, I want to actually kick it off to the group for a question about why it is that we engage in direct action. So what is the point of direct action, and why do we do it as part of our campaigns? And feel free to just go off mute and shout out an answer. Anybody? Is direct action important? Should we even be doing direct action? Can't we just kind of just do low-level stuff all the time to win?
I would say it's a valuable angle to use in approaching different types of movements that we're working on and get some public attention and some, community involvement. on an individual level, I know we've seen with our remake ambassadors that it's a really good way of fortifying the movement too, even just on an internal level. But it can get media attention, kind of keep, the conversation very present in the public eye. So that's one reason I would say, or a couple.
Yeah. Thanks, Tessa. Yeah. And also just want to acknowledge that doing these trainings over Zoom is really tough. And so I appreciate people putting themselves out there and talking, because this is not, ideally this would be in person, but we're glad to be able to do it over Zoom and have a bigger audience. So I think that was a really great quote, really great answer, Tessa, and really ties in well with the quote on the next slide. Sarah, if you could take us there, which is a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in his letter from a Birmingham jail, in which he writes, "You may well ask why direct action, why sit-ins, marches, and so forth. Isn't negotiation a better path? You are exactly right in your call for negotiation. Indeed, this is the purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and establish such creative tension that a community that has consistently refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue." And for our purposes here, I would take the word community and I would substitute it with brand or corporation. And I hope he would be okay with my taking that liberty here. But that's really why we engage in direct action, because it creates a public crisis for our target. In this case, the brand or the retailer. And as Tessa referenced, that public crisis is hopefully getting picked up in the press, in the community where the brand's CEO or other executives live and work and have relationships. And it starts to become very publicly embarrassing for them to have a campaign that has direct action happening. And it forces them to engage in a negotiation and ultimately to meet the demands of the campaign. So that's why we do direct action. And direct action goes hand in hand with what we call escalation planning. And before we talk about what this is, I want to ask if anybody can tell us what escalation planning is, or can you describe what it means to have an escalation plan?
I do not know, but I can take a stab at it.
Please.
I would assume, since it's a situation where you're going to be talking to individuals where you haven't spoken to them before, you don't know what actions could happen. You don't know if it's going to be a productive, peaceful conversation. You don't know if security or law enforcement is going to be called. So having a plan for all aspects of your direct action. That's my guess. Thanks,
Carly. That's great. So I think that's actually a really interesting, it's an interesting answer. And I think that is absolutely true, and definitely something you want to have in the case of doing a direct action. There's also escalation planning when it comes to your campaign more broadly. And that's kind of the piece I want to talk about here. And then Sarah, when she talks about action design, we'll talk about sort of how you handle like the start to finish of a specific action. But for the purposes of this next section, I want to talk about escalation planning in the sort of broader like campaign plan sense over the whole life of your campaign. And so going to the next slide, escalation planning or an escalating campaign is a campaign that increases over time in pressure. So what that means is that you start your campaign with tactics that are relatively low pressure. You send some nice emails to the company. Maybe you do a very friendly letter delivery. These are things that are not direct actions in the sort of traditional campaign sense of the word. But then as time goes on and the company continues to delay, deny, refuse to engage you, you start to engage in higher and higher pressure tactics and more direct actions. And so that's what we mean when we talk about escalation or escalation planning. And I'm curious if anybody has thoughts about why it is that we engage in escalating campaigns? Why is it important to have a campaign that escalates in pressure over time, do you think? Why don't we just like start off day one, and why aren't we doing a sit-in outside the Levi's headquarters on day one? How would that go, do you think?
Well, if the company is able to diffuse the pressure of that day one action, then there's nothing for it to escalate to. So there's like no fear that it's going to continue to get higher pressure.
Mm-hmm. Yep. How do you think it would be perceived publicly if on the very first day of your campaign, without having said anything to Levi's or your target, you just went and did a sit-in at their headquarters and you hadn't even told them yet what you were asking them to do? What do you think? How do you think publicly that would be perceived?
I would think it could kind of like discredit the movement a bit, right off the bat, if you don't have that foundation first of like, direct communication with the brand.
Yeah, exactly. And that is a big piece of why we engage in escalating campaigns, because escalation gives you a moral high ground publicly, and it gives you more credibility, because you can make the case publicly that you tried the friendlier route of sending emails, of asking nicely, of sending letters, of doing some low-key stuff on social media, and the company refused to listen to you. You brought this really important issue to their attention. You gave them plenty of opportunities with clear deadlines for a response. They're still not doing the right thing. And so you have no other choice but to engage in more and more direct action to make the company listen and to bring more public attention to this critical issue. And so that's why we engage in escalation, because if we start off with the highest pressure tactics first, it takes away our credibility, and it gives the company the moral high ground when we are the ones who really deserve and need to have the moral high ground. And escalation planning also to say that, yeah, please.
Yeah, I had a question. How do you determine when you are thinking of your escalation strategy that the company has responded in a timely enough manner? And I think with a lot of the brand engagement, there's a sense of, but I did respond to you, but we get a stock response. And so then we start to escalate, like taking the Levi's example again, right? Sent the nice letters, did the Twitter storm, then had the protest outside, but there's a sentiment from the company of, but we have responded and you guys continue to put pressure tactics, essentially discrediting this strategy. So how do you calibrate or respond to that? Yeah,
it's important to be really clear about the distinction between responding and meeting the demand. So Levi's has responded. That's not the problem. And that's not what we were asking for. We weren't asking for them to respond to our letters. We are asking for them to sign the accord. And so until they do that, they haven't met the thing that we've asked them to do. And I think it's important, because I think I should, like, that's a really good point. And people get, the media or the sort of general public gets confused about that, because they're like, well, Levi's said they responded to your letter, so why are you mad at them still? And it's important to be clear that responding to letters is not gonna change working conditions for garment workers on the ground. The thing that we are asking the company to do is the only thing that's going to change it, and it's also the only thing that's going to end our campaign. So I think it's important to be clear about, like, dialogue with a company is not the same as doing the right thing. And just a couple of other things on escalation planning that I think are important to understand. One is that escalation planning is something that should happen before your campaign even launches, ideally. It doesn't have to be that way. If you're in a campaign and you realize, oh shoot, we need to come up with a plan, you can always come up with it. But ideally, you're doing it from the get-go, mapping out what the next 6 months, year, whatever look like, how your campaign will proceed over that time and how it's going to escalate. And that should include looking at the brand's calendar. Do they have any big upcoming events that they're sponsoring? Adidas, for example, is about to sponsor the World Cup. That's an opportunity. Do they have any investor meetings that you know of coming up where you could plan something? And so you want to be putting your escalation plan into a calendar and a timeline. And you may not need to use your whole escalation plan. And if that's the case, that's great. And kudos, and you can save your ideas and your plans for another campaign and another target. But it's always good to have it and know, kind of what your next step is going to be. And with that, I'm going to move to the next slide, which we'll talk about quickly, and then I'll turn it over to Sarah. And so this is a really good slide, and I think these slides will all be shared and available to people after this, so you don't feel like you have to write this all down. But this is a really good slide to help you think about your tactics that are part of your escalation plan. And so a tactic is just an activity. It's a thing you do that is part of your campaign. And when you're thinking about your tactics, you want to think about most, if not all, of the questions here. And probably the most important one is the question at the very top, which is goals and strategy, and thinking about how your tactic fits into your overall campaign strategy and how does it help us achieve our goal. And bearing in mind that our goal is always the company agrees to our demand. Our goal is not a meeting. Our goal is not a phone call with a brand. Our goal is not an email from a brand. Our goal is the company meeting and agreeing to our demand. A couple of other things on here I want to just talk about. Target, because I think target is also a really important one to be clear about from the outset of your campaign. Your target is the person who can give you what you want. They are the person who has the power to make the decision to do the thing you are asking. In the case of a corporate campaign, it's almost always the CEO. It is not the CSR person. It is not the PR person. Those are people that the company sends to deal with you, but they are not the people that have the power to give you what you want. You can also have secondary targets, and secondary targets are targets who have influence over your primary target. These are usually things like board members or major stockholders. And so you can target them too, but you always want to be thinking about how does what we are doing, how does our tactic put pressure on our target? Should always be able to answer that question. And then I think in the interest of time, I'll kind of skip the rest of these questions, but we can come back to them if we want. And I think you want to be able to answer all of these questions for each of the tactics that you're engaging in. And so I'm going to pass it over now to Sarah to talk about action design.
Okay, we've been through our plan. We've decided in the escalation plan, we're going to do an action. It's time. We're going to gather everybody outside the headquarters. What are the brass tacks of what we need to do? So I have a little checklist here that I go through when thinking about an action, and again, available after. But I think it's useful to ask yourself these questions. So how does this pressure my target? But not just pressure your target, how does this appeal to your base? So actions are an opportunity to build community. Some of my best memories are at actions. And I think anyone who's been to one of the Levi's actions knows that it just builds such a sense of community to be taking this direct action together and really doing something meaningfully with other people who share your values. And so when you're designing an action, you want to think about how will it draw people in our own communities to attend? How will it speak to them? And also, does it engage bystanders? How are we going to appeal to people on the street? Not every action has to. Maybe this is an action where we say we're not engaging bystanders. We're doing something and it's only about targeting the store management. But maybe other times you want to do an action that invites people to participate or invites people to ask questions as a way to connect and grow our community. So it's important to think about and decide those things ahead of time. And really with that, you're asking question number 3 here, which is what is the message that this action is sending? And what is the story that we're telling? So one of the actions that I've done quite a few of around assigning the accord specifically are die-ins or actions with images related to funerals, which are extremely polarizing, and people have a lot of feelings about. And that's the goal of those actions, is to really make real and tangible for those people and tell the story of the impact that the production of these cheap clothes are having on the families of the people lost in the Rana Plaza collapse. So that's the story we're telling, the message we're sending with that action. And we're going to design all of those materials to help people understand that. Not every action has to be that intense, but you can vary these and increase these on your escalation, in your escalation plan to kind of create this large narrative. And then I know we have a lot of media people on this call, so I won't spend much time on it, but of course, always asking, how is the media going to report this action? What's the one headline we want them to take away? And what's the one photo we want them to use? So designing the action to make sure that that message is coming across most clearly, and that that's a really concise and understandable message for the media to consume. And then of course, do I have enough people to pull it off? I think this is always an important consideration, and it requires us to be really realistic about who we can gather at an action and what we will do if we get more people than we expect or we get less people than we expect. So making sure that if you've planned a picket and you wind up with 3 people, okay, that's going to be hard to do a picket with. What is the pivot? And in the same way, if you planned an action that is going into the store and hiding flyers in the pockets, and you wind up with 15 or 20 people, okay, that's probably too many people to surreptitiously hide things in a store. What is the pivot that we're going to do? So these are the kinds of questions you want to ask yourself ahead of time when you're designing the action. Then you want to think about the roles and the people that you'll need at the action. So I want to talk about 6 or 7 different point people that ideally you want to have at your action. People can play multiple roles depending on how many you have, but it's good to have these assigned ahead of time, because you never want to be scrambling on stage or, at the action while it's going midway and looking at each other and going, oh, who's leading the chants? Do you know any chants? What are our chants? So the more decisions you can make ahead of time, the more you can be engaged in the action, engaged in the community building, talking to people, and not scrambling to, figure out who's doing what. So first thing you want is a chant leader. I am not a loud person, not usually the chant leader. But this is a great role for someone who really likes to take up space and who has a loud and commanding voice. Times when I've been the chant leader or had someone the chant leader who's very quiet, it's just difficult, because people will be, especially if you're doing a marching action, you need to be able to bring that energy and keep the crowd together and engaged and on the same page and doing your chants together. So pick someone really loud to be your chant leader. And ideally assign this person to pass out chant sheets. I think one of the best things you can do is to decide your chants ahead of time, print them on little quarter sheets of paper. And then when you get together at your action, do one run through where you practice with everybody. You have the chant leader read out the chant so they hear the rhythm as you're hearing it when you write it. Because I can't tell you, this is a real thing. Like when you write a chant, the rhythm seems so intuitive to you, and then you hand it to someone else and they go to read it and they just have, it just doesn't match up and you can hear it. So you do one run through so everyone's on the same page, and then everyone gets to keep their chant sheet to reference during the action. And this is especially helpful if you're chanting in multiple languages. There's a lot of great actions that do chants in Spanish, and it's helpful because then people can follow along even if they don't speak that language, and keep track of the chants that are going on. Mic check speaker. So this is something that can be really useful to do at a large action, especially where it might be too difficult for one person to give a speech. Maybe it's not an action with sound equipment, it's hard to hear. And basically how it works is one person yells out a short line, the beginning of their speech, and the group repeats it. So we are here today, and everyone repeats, we are here today to call upon Levi's, and reads out a brief speech like that so that the surrounding crowd can hear what you're there about, people can understand, so that the store management can hear, makes for great video footage. And it's often something that looks really powerful, especially if you have quotes, if you're amplifying the voices of workers in your speech. I think those things can be really great through this human microphone type of amplification. And there's a lot of places, we'll talk about how to figure out the specific laws in your states and everything, but there are lots of places that restrict use of megaphones or use of amplification of any kind. So this is a good go-to that is difficult for them to restrict, and they don't have laws against yelling usually, so you can get around that more easily. Okay, the one everyone wants to know about, the police liaison. So the best approach to dealing with police is to stall as long as possible. Interactions with police at a protest where you are not trying to get arrested, right? We're only talking about the kinds of actions where you're not trying to get arrested. Your goal is just to waste that person's time and keep the conversation going so that the action can continue. And, one, you're leaving room for the action to continue. Two, if they are going to try to arrest you, let's say worst case scenario, right? It takes an incredible amount of manpower, equipment, and time to arrest a group of people, right? It does not happen quickly. I've done actions to get arrested on purpose, and you have to keep going forever because they have to get wagons and they have to get equipment and they have to call their boss and their boss's boss and their boss's boss. So you're letting, worst case scenario, right? You're letting that process play out and you're watching what's going on so that you have a heads up if anything is getting hinky. If they're pulling up with paddy wagons, then you're saying, okay, guys, team, let's get out of here. Let's get on the move. And in the meantime, you're engaging them in, one, talk about the issues, presume that they are people too who would also care about garment workers, and ask them to get engaged and to, voice their support for this. And you're also asking them lots of specific questions about exactly where you need to be and exactly what you are and are not allowed to do. So typically you're allowed to be on public sidewalks as long as you're not blocking them. You're allowed to be, you have to be away from the private property of the store. They may move you away from the entrance. Some places will let you get away with blocking an entrance for longer than others, but typically they want you to be away from the entrance so that there can be a free flow of traffic. And of course, I think this goes without saying, but we never want to block anyone from being able to leave the store or anyone from being able to go in the store. And as long as you can demonstrate that you are on the sidewalk and you're not blocking the flow of traffic, you should be allowed to continue in protest for at least a little bit. And we'll show you the resources where to check specific laws in your cities and states, because of course this varies from place to place. But I'm talking about, most major cities. I'll also share that in most major cities, police are used to protests, especially at this point, and they usually have, a pretty thorough protocol to go through, and they know what you're doing when you're stalling them. And it's sort of a, we're both playing out our roles here a little bit. We have to do this. Interactions can vary from super friendly to more hostile, but whatever it is, the police liaison's role is to just stay calm, keep the conversation going, and then to indicate to the group if they need to leave. I would say that's maybe the thing you want to tell people ahead of time, is that we have a police liaison. Tell everyone that if police tries to talk to them, they can point them to the police liaison. They don't have to engage separately. And police will usually ask who's in charge here when they walk up, and then your police liaison knows to go forward. And then that, for everyone in the group to know to listen to that person. If that person says, hey, it's time to go, everyone just picks up their stuff and moves away. No big deal. Because in the end, as long as you're clearing the area, they're not going to arrest you or follow you or want to cite you or want to do paperwork related to you or anything like that. Once you leave the area, the problem to them is gone 99.99 times out of 100. And I've done a lot of actions all over the country, and truly the police are almost without fail just interested in getting you gone so that they can go back to doing nothing or whatever else they were doing before. So leaving is always the key. The police liaison should be in charge of making that decision.
Sarah, can I ask
a couple? Yes, please.
What is your guidance when it comes to private security? So, in Philly, there was the mall security that escorted us out. At the Levi's headquarters, there's a public square, but it's private security that's there, but they are uniformed and sort of acting like police and telling you to leave. I guess, do they have the same kind of ability? Do they have to call in the police? Do you stall them more, or do you treat them the same as police when it comes to private security?
So Theresa, I'm interested to hear what you have to say. I have always been told that they have absolutely no power. They have to call the police to do anything, and that they typically just try to bully you because they don't want to do that. And if they can intimidate you into leaving, that's better for them. Theresa, do you have a different
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. They have no power to arrest you or take any kind of legal action against you in the same way that police do. And I think like the best tactic with them is to stall. And I think your police liaison should be prepared to deal with private security as well. If you are in a mall or you're inside a store or otherwise on private property, your police liaison should also be prepared to deal with security. Yeah. And I see your comment in the chat. It's not different states have different laws around filming and recording without your consent. So that's a good thing to bear in mind as well. And it's helpful. It can be helpful to know like the laws in your state about recording without consent. We can come back to this when we talk about know your rights, but does that help answer the question around private security?
100%. So helpful, especially as we walk into the December 5th action, because that's what we'll be up against. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so going quickly through the rest, you have the store manager leader, the person who is assigned to go and talk with the store manager, try to get them to agree to call headquarters. Depending on whether you're in the store, out of the store, and generally depending on how much the store manager cares, I feel like I've done some actions where the store manager is like, you guys go right ahead, and others where the store manager seems personally invested in defending the company with his life and is, yelling and screaming and is nuts. So in that case, I would say your tactic is the same as the police. You can also stall with the store manager to allow the action to continue by asking the same sorts of questions and trying to engage them on the issue. So then you've got your flyer leads. These people could be hiding flyers in the apparel in the store, or they can just be handing flyers to customers, offering them to people as they walk in, just politely asking if they'd like to take a flyer, if they'd like to learn more, if they are interested in learning more about the workers who make Levi's clothes, for example, things like that. You have the media contact, someone who's assigned to talk to the media in the same way, tell everyone to point media to that media person. And then the photographer, of course, always having someone who's in charge of taking cool pictures. And my word of advice is to always make sure you have more marchers than photographers, because sometimes you have that moment in an action where a photo is really good and then everyone goes to take the photo and then the photo itself disappears because all the people left. So make sure you have someone who's assigned to do it and who can share with everybody else so people can stay engaged in the protest. So I'll stop for a moment and just say that I think creativity really matters when it comes to actions. And this is a photo from the first action I did in my life at 18. It was an anything but clothes fashion show where we had people say they would rather wear trash than wear sweatshop clothing. And I made this dress out of garbage bags and I think pool noodles and duct tape. And I keep this picture to remind me that an action that is visually impressive and visually interesting will stick in people's minds, because people still ask me about this action that I went to college with. And I think it is a real opportunity, especially in this group with so many creative people and so many people with artistic backgrounds, to think about how we can bring that into actions. So, you can do a couple of regular good old bread and butter pickets and marches, but they can start to get stale after a little while, especially if we're targeting the same target for an extended period of time. And that's when it's time to say, what giant props can we make? What holiday theme can we use? What can we dress up in? What can we create to create something that is engaging to our community, is engaging to bystanders, is memorable to Levi's, is interesting to the media, creates a good photo and a good headline? How can we really galvanize our creativity? And then it gives you an excuse to do big art builds and drink with everybody, which I think are the most fun part, the art builds the night before the protest. And I think it should be more regular for protests to have an established night before art build. It's my preference. Okay, I won't go over this, but I just wanted to include it as a resource for folks. It's just a useful checklist that I use before actions, making sure that your recruitment is done, your supplies are accounted for, and your roles are designated. And I realized one role I didn't talk about actually is marshals. If you have a really large group of people, it can be helpful to have folks assigned to tell people where to go and where not to go, especially if you have cops there that are being really intense about, not being in the street or being 15 feet from the door. You want to have people who are in charge of keeping everybody else 15 feet from the door. Or if you're doing a picket, helping people keep that circle, which is very difficult, getting everybody to keep the circle and to go around the 2 poles at the end. So, you have people ahead of time that are going to move. All right, giving it back to Theresa.
Thanks, Sarah. So I'm going to repeat the same disclaimer I made at the beginning, which is that I am not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. And this is not a legal training. When it comes to know your rights, there's some tips and some guidance that we can offer, but the best resource is an organization called the National Lawyers Guild. And there is a web link right there that I would encourage people to bookmark and save that goes to their website and specifically links to a pocket Know Your Rights guide that is really helpful for understanding what to do in specific scenarios and what to do when you encounter law enforcement and how to handle it. The National Lawyers Guild is a really great resource too for doing local Know Your Rights trainings. So if your group is like, we really want to start engaging in more direct actions, we want to start doing some of this more escalation and confrontational type actions, the National Lawyers Guild has chapters in, I think, every state or just about every state in the country who have lawyers who are very happy to do these types of trainings with you. They will also often, if you ask them ahead of time, send legal observers. So let's say you're planning an action where it's a little bit more confrontational. You think that police are going to show up, or maybe you're even trying to get police to show up and get arrested. In those cases, if you let them know ahead of time, the National Lawyers Guild will send people who are trained as legal observers who will stand to the side of your action. They will not participate in your action, but they'll be there to observe what's happening and whether or not what's happening is in line with the law. And then later on, if your case goes to court or something like that, you have people with legal background who can testify about what happened. And so that can be really useful. And then the cops will see those people too. They will usually identify themselves with a vest or some kind of hat. And then if the cops show up, they know, hey, there's folks here with legal background. I'm being watched. Maybe I'm going to be a little bit more careful about how I handle this situation. The other thing I would say for them, and this gets to one of the questions in the chat, is like, what if we do want to get arrested? The National Lawyers Guild will often offer pro bono support for folks who get arrested for engaging in nonviolent civil disobedience. And so if you get arrested and you're not prepared for that, the first call I would make is to the National Lawyers Guild. Okay. With all of that being said, the one other sort of disclaimer I want to make here, you're good, so you can go to the next slide, is this all pertains to the United States. I don't know anything about how this stuff works outside of the US. If you are outside of the US or you're engaged in an action outside of the US, I would really strongly encourage you to seek out resources there because this is only when it comes to dealing with police in the United States. All right. So when it comes to actually interacting with law enforcement, and we covered the private security thing, right? Private security can't arrest you, but they can call the police, and so the police can then show up. So if a cop does show up, and they start speaking to you or engaging with you on the street, and you're not the designated police liaison, your main goal here is to invoke your rights by saying a couple of key phrases out loud. And those phrases are up here on the slide. So the first thing is to ask, am I free to go? If they say yes, you should leave as long as you can do that. I have had situations where I've been confronted with cops and I physically couldn't move. I was sort of pinned in, like in a group. This was at a massive, massive, massive anti-war protest. But as long as you are able to physically leave, you should do that. If the cop says anything other than yes, when you ask if you're free to go, you should then follow up by saying, am I being detained? If they say anything other than yes, you should immediately say that you're going to remain silent. You want to speak to, I'm sorry, that you don't want to talk any further, and then you leave immediately. If they start to ask you more and more questions, and for some reason you can't, or you choose not to leave, then you want to say, I'm going to remain silent and I want to speak to a lawyer. And again, they can continue to ask you questions over and over and over and try to get you to say something incriminating, but you can continue to simply repeat, I'm going to remain silent and I want to speak to a lawyer. So those are the key questions you want to remember. The first question is, am I free to go? If they say yes, you leave. If they say anything other than yes, you say, am I being detained? And then if they say anything other than yes, you want to walk away, say nothing further. But if you are being detained, you then want to say, I want to remain silent. I want to speak to a lawyer. The one exception to this is that in about 23 states in the US, you are required, if they ask you to identify yourself, to give your name. There is a list in the National Lawyers Guild Know Your Rights booklet showing which states that is. So you want to just bear that in mind, that if they ask you to identify yourself, you may have to give them your name. But that's it. You should not give them any other information. And ideally, you should seek to just leave and disengage from the interaction if you're allowed to go and you're not being detained. I think I want to reinforce the point that Sarah made earlier, which is that police really, really, really don't want to arrest you. It is a hassle for them. It is a time suck. It is a resource suck. But I also want to sort of make the reminder that there are people in our groups, in our communities, who are more vulnerable when it comes to interactions with law enforcement. People of color, people in the LGBTQ+ community, people who are differently abled. All of these folks have different vulnerabilities when it comes to dealing with cops. And so you want to know generally, like ahead of time, who are the folks in my action who might be more vulnerable when it comes to dealing with police. And you want to make sure that they in particular feel supported. And you also probably don't want them to be on the front lines dealing with the cops, unless they say like, yes, I really want this. I'm comfortable with this. But it's important to have those conversations with those folks as a group ahead of time, because that is just the reality of the world that we live in, and police target certain people in certain communities. And we want to make sure that we're being really sensitive to those folks and making sure they feel safe and supported. All right, I think we're at time. I know we wanted to talk about a couple of scenarios and then do a Q&A. Emily, what are your thoughts? I know we had talked about doing like breakouts for the scenarios. I'm wondering if we still want to do that, or if we want to just kind of stay in the full group here.
Maybe we've got a small enough group where we just stay in the full group here, and we could run the 2 scenarios. And then if we have time for Q&A, or if folks are able to stay longer, then we could answer any lingering questions.
Great, let's do that.
So do you want me to read out the, oh, you've got them, look at you.
Okay, so there are 2 scenarios that we wanted to kind of just practice with as a group, and they're listed here. So we'll start with the first one. So scenario one is our group is protesting outside of a store in the mall. Mall security told us they had called the police on us. What do we do now? So I'm not going to answer this. I'm going to turn it over to the group, and I'm going to ask the group if we have any volunteers to answer what you do next.
I will volunteer. Oh, someone else.
I was
Go
just
for
going
it.
to say, I would have our designated police spokesperson ready on deck in an organized, calm way.
Mhm.
And have them just explain why we are there, what we're protesting for, ask, like, can we stand here, or something along those lines, I would say. Ask questions.
Do you leave the mall?
If they didn't ask us to leave. No.
Okay. What if they did ask you to leave?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Holly. I appreciate that. I know it's tough to be. I know those are difficult questions. I think that was a perfect answer. I think that was great, Holly. And this is a tough scenario. This is a scenario we were in Philly when we did a protest at the Levi's Action a while ago. Sorry, Sarah, you said something?
No, sorry, just so we can look at each other.
Oh, yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. It's, I think in this case, like, the thing to do is to do what they want, but to do it really slowly. Because a mall is private property. Technically, yes, a mall is private property. And so if they ask you to leave, it's private property, and you could be arrested for staying after they've asked you to leave. That being said, the mall security cannot arrest you, and it's going to take a while for the police to get there. And even after the police get there, it's going to be a long time before they arrest you. There's going to have to be conversations and all sorts of things. So my suggestion would be to make sure you know it when you're going into it. What is the one single thing you want to get out of that action before you leave? Is it everybody standing outside the store holding up signs and you get a really good picture? Is it a short video of you trying to engage with a store manager while everybody else stands next to you? Think about, like, what is the most important thing we can get out of this, and do that first, because they are going to, if it's inside a mall, they're going to kick you out. That's going to happen. And then when they start kicking you out, go as slowly as possible, and draw the interaction out as much as you can. Carly.
Does your advice apply to, for this specific scenario, apply to groups of all sizes? If you have like 4 or 5 people there, would you still delay as much as possible? Okay, all right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yep. The security, mall security cannot do anything to you.
No, they have no power. One thing that can be useful, especially if you have a little bit of a larger group, like 8 to 10 people, we call it the blame the group strategy. You can use this with brands, you can use this with store managers, where you are the harried mom who's trying to get everybody to move, but it's very hectic. There's so many people. You're like, yes, no, we're gonna move. Just give me 1 second. Let me just talk to everybody, and then we're gonna get going. And so now you're going back and you're talking to them, and you're coming back and talking to him, and you're just sort of parenting for good. You know what I mean? You're just blah, 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 taking too long. They don't know what to do with that.
Yeah. Sarah, unless there are other questions about this one, can we throw the other scenario up there? All right, so the second one, and this one I think applies pretty directly to the Levi's action. So while protesting on the sidewalk in front of a store, a police officer arrived on the scene. At first, the police officer watched us from a few feet away, but when members of our group attempted to go into the store, he physically blocked the door and said we couldn't go inside and had to leave. What do we do now? Does anybody want to take a stab at answering this question based on what we talked about? Do you fight the police officer to go inside? No.
In this case, I think we would ask them to explain where we should be standing and, oh, why aren't we able to go in there? Are you able to point us to, that information, that policy, that law that restricts us from doing so?
Yep. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, that's great, Tessa. So yeah, I mean, I think if the police officer is doing this, like physically blocking the door and all of that, do not, we're not here to try to create confrontations with police, right? Like, have your police liaison ask all those questions that Tessa was just saying, but also make sure your group continues doing whatever they're doing, just off to the side a little ways, right? And it can be scary to see police, right? Like, it's scary to see security show up, even if you know that they can't do anything. It can be really scary to see security and law enforcement show up. And so it's important to try to mentally prepare yourself for that ahead of time, prepare your group for it, and just try to keep all of this stuff in the back of your mind, because the minute you see those cops show up, your adrenaline is going to start to kick in. So really try to think, remind yourself about all the stuff going into it. And yeah, I mean, with the police officer in this situation, I would have your liaison dealing with them, asking them questions, getting clear about where you can be, because you can be somewhere. You can be on public sidewalks. You can't be blocking the flow of traffic, but there's somewhere you can be. And also try to keep your group together, right? Make sure people don't immediately see the police and go, oh my gosh, we have to leave. We're all going to go to our cars. We're going to go to the subway. Keep your group together, have a plan for where you are going to go if you can't be right there. But do your action, continue to do your action, and just move it to, a slightly different spot if you need to do that, if you can't go inside.
I think if doing something inside the store is a critical part of your action, I would not try to do that after you've started the protest part. So if you need to be in the store to put stuff in flyers, to give a letter to the manager, to whatever, you need to send people in sneaky in small groups and have them in the store ahead of time to make sure that you're able to be in there. And then, a fun tactic that I like to do is having someone very dramatically find a flyer in the pocket and start shouting oh my God, these clothes are made in sweatshops. The workers who made these are unsafe. And then have everybody all of a sudden get all upset and storm out of the store and start the protest. It's very dramatic and confusing. It's a great visual. And then the people who need to stay in the store to give the letter to the store manager can stay, they're already there, and everyone else can start the energetic part outside.
Sarah and Theresa, I wonder if you can share, knowing you have so many protests under your belt, what you do in terms of calming your nerves, Theresa, to your point of the adrenaline kicking in, because there's a lot of people in our community that are new or younger at this, and there is a sense of, okay, we prepare, but when it's time to do it, the nerves or the shyness starts to kick in. So what are some of the ways that you deal with all those feelings?
Sarah, do you want to go first?
Yeah, the only thing that gets me through is a sense of moral righteousness and total indignancy. I have to really tap into that I genuinely believe I am doing something right and powerful, and anything trying to get in the way of what we're doing is not on the side of workers. And I really do think of the people protesting in Bangladesh and Pakistan for accord safety things, and how intimidating that is, and that I am standing alongside them, and this is my version. And the other thing is just to really for your group as the organizer, the more calm and professional you are, the more calm and professional everyone will be. So cops are sometimes taken aback by someone who says, hi, yes, I'm the police liaison. My name's Sarah. It's great to meet you. He shakes his hand, immediately launches into a thing. That can sometimes take them aback and lead to a lot more positive interaction, because they're like, okay, this person's experienced. We're going to have a good interaction. It's not going to be combative.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. And I think having this information is also really powerful, like knowing ahead of time kind of what your rights are and what you can and cannot do is really powerful as well. Yeah. But yeah, it's totally nerve-wracking. I still get butterflies and nerves in my stomach for doing this kind of stuff. And you kind of have to go through it, I think.
I usually, if we're getting really vulnerable, usually after a protest, if I was police liaison, I'll cry when I get home. I have so much adrenaline in my body, and I'm just I never do anything wrong. I don't break any rules. I hate being told that I'm breaking a rule or doing something wrong, and like inconveniencing store employees. Like, it's my worst nightmare in my regular life. So yeah, I totally cry when I get home, but in the moment, you just tap into, I am doing something right here. And even though these people, like, I believe these people would agree with me if they really understood. But yeah, no, everybody feels like that, totally. And all the cops are giant men and they're really mean. And that sucks. Like, it just sucks when giant men are mean to you. And I think we should just acknowledge that it's not fun. It's a service.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had a
Other
couple.
questions? Oh yeah, go for it, Tessa.
Right on it, Theresa. So a couple questions quick. One of them is there anything that you should avoid saying to the police, just generally speaking, in terms of the type of actions that we'd be doing? Is there anything like, I understand like certain language, but you can basically like plead the fifth, or you can say, you'd like to speak to a lawyer, that sort of thing. But if you're kind of in that in-between point before, like where it's still a more like cordial conversation, is there anything like, if you can, that you should just avoid mentioning or stating in that, more casual conversation initially?
I can't really think of anything.
I mean,
Sarah,
don't tell them you're not going to leave. I wouldn't make threats that you are not prepared to follow through on. And I wouldn't bring unnecessary bravado to it, if you can. Coming from a place of humility and education, even though that's not my natural orientation when it comes to talking to cops, is helpful. I don't think there's anything you can say, you don't have to be that careful with your language because they're only half paying attention to you anyway.
Gotcha. I was going to say, in terms of like introducing yourself or why you're there, your organization, like, should you hold off on conceding any information that you're not directly asked to provide in that initial conversation? Or is it helpful to like give them some pieces of information right off the bat?
I think it's fine to give your name. This is something that makes a lot of people really nervous. I think it helps to give at least your first name, and I don't see any benefit to withholding your name. My name is in a lot of cop notebooks. I just feel like it doesn't go anywhere. Obviously, if you have, outstanding, if you have different circumstances, consider your own circumstances, but for me, it's fine. And honestly, if the action is advertised publicly and we're giving a letter to the store manager, they've got all that info anyway, if they really want it, it doesn't behoove you to withhold it in the moment just to prove a point.
That's helpful. Yeah. Thank you.
I want to mention one other thing, Tessa, unless you had more questions.
It's a tiny one, but you go first on that.
Okay, cool. Okay. So this is one thing I wanted to mention, and this applies both, I think, to the Levi's headquarters, but really any kind of direct action that you're doing, is that you do not want to have your meeting place be the front of the store or the front of the building, especially if this is a company that you've been protesting at before, because they're going to see you and they're going to immediately tell you to leave, and it's going to kind of just preempt your whole thing. And this happened to us in Philly when we were doing the Levi's action. The minute that the store manager saw us, she immediately got very upset, started yelling, telling us to leave. We did not even have a chance to even say hello or introduce ourselves or say why we were there. So I really would encourage you to have your meeting places be a block away in a place that is not immediately visible to folks in the store or the building. Because it takes a while for folks to trickle in, and you want to have maybe you want to practice your chant or introduce the, whoever the leaders are, whatever. Try to meet in a place that is not going to be visible to the folks that you're going to be engaging with in your action.
I have one more thing. I can't believe we forgot to say this. This is one of those, so I'll kick myself. perhaps the single most important part of an action for people is the debrief afterwards. I firmly believe you should absolutely never skip a debrief after an action. It's really important as the organizer to bring everybody together, to ask the group, how did this make you feel? What are your reflections? Do we feel like this was effective? What made you feel empowered? What could we do better next time? And let people kind of process, because it is a very intense and emotional thing. And then it can be very strange to just go off back into your regular life. So I think it's important as organizers that we make sure that space is there. And if people are freaked out and they need to be reassured that that was fine and that this was a really good action and we achieved our goal, I think it's critical to do that right away. That's my favorite part too.
So with my second question, you tell me if it's easier to reach out afterwards or mention now. I don't want to keep anybody over.
Go ahead, Tessa. I think if folks need to hop off because it's been an hour, you should feel free, but I'm okay to stay on for a couple more.
Thank you so much. By the way, in general, this has been so incredible. I like all of these words and tips are like gold to us, I think I can say. So thank you. My last one is just, in terms of getting people really comfortable and feeling excited about the protest, both leading up to it and during, and kind of maintaining that energy, are there any general tips for like that approach where you walk the fine line of making sure folks are like prepared and they're armed with the information they need, but they're not scared off by that, type of education and preparation that comes with it? Like what's a good way to keep folks still like joyful and excited through that?
Yeah. I think for me, I think it would be kind of reminding them why you're there. Like reminding them that you are there on the side of justice and on the side of the workers, and that you have this tremendous power as US consumers or wherever you are. And it's, sometimes it can be scary and nerve-wracking, but that you have the moral high ground here, and what you are doing is making a difference. What you are doing is bringing pressure to bear in a way that is really powerful and useful. I think that can help people feel a little bit more empowered in the moment. Yeah, I don't know, Sarah, if you have other thoughts.
I think you have to feel it with the kind of person if they'll be empowered by more information and control, or if sometimes people need to just show up. Like I'm a control freak. So like, yeah, make me a chant leader at my first protest, because that's going to make me feel like I have a job. I know exactly what I'm supposed to be doing and I'm contributing. And there are other people where you might want to say, listen, we've got it. You just come and participate. You don't need to bring anything, learn anything. We'll do a few minutes when everybody gets there where we'll go over rights and roles, and then you can just enjoy and shout and, see if you like it. And really adapting to each person. And no matter what, if you're the organizer, you project that air of you've got it under control, because you do. If things get weird and something happens that was not mentioned in this training, you'll call us, right? You'll reach out to the community and we'll mobilize the resources that you need. So you're the one who is connected and who has the resources to take care of whatever happens at this protest. And you want to extend that and make everyone feel like they're connected to something larger. They're not alone in this.
That's really helpful. Thank you both so much.
Thank you both so much. I think we'll just give a quick round of applause before we go. And please know this community is always here for you. So the resources we talked about today are going to be in the Ambassador Resource Drive, this recording. You can review this before your next protest. Like, we encourage you to do all of that. And thank you, Theresa and Sarah, for sharing so much insightful advice with us today.
Thank you.
So
That's
fun.
awesome.
Yeah, so glad we could do this. And I think I speak for both of us. We're always here if other questions come up.
Amazing. We appreciate you so much. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.